So welcome everyone. We are so very excited to lead you through today's interactive session titled Diversity Papers, Tips and Guidelines for Authors and Evaluators. I am Rochelle Williams, and I'll be helping lead the awards committee this year for the ASEE's Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we are joined by some champions for the Society's DEI efforts. So we will be having Adrienne Minerick, former chair of the commission and ASEE president-elect, join us, along with Susan, who you've heard from, who's the past chair of the commission and an ASEE fellow, and Becky Bates, former chair of the commission and former lead of the awards committee. Next slide, please. So you all have the opportunity to complete the poll. Thank you so much for doing that. And as Susan said, we just want to make sure that you all add in what type of breakout session you want to join today. As we said, we want this session to be very interactive. And so if you've not had an opportunity, please remember to add whether you want to be in the paper reviewer or the author session or both at the end of your name. So for today's agenda, we will spend probably the next 50 minutes centering our focus on how we review and how we support reviewers in giving constructive feedback, especially related to DEI issues, as well as writing a good paper. The Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion has highlighted scholarship in this area with the Best Paper Award since 2015. Adrienne will share with us the history and motivation of the Best DEI paper, and then Susan will lead us through what makes a good DEI paper versus what makes a great DEI paper. Becky will then lead us through the review process, speak to the rubric, and then lead us in our breakout sessions. After the breakout sessions, we will come back together to do a brief report out discussing the best practices from the perspective of either the author of the reviewer or the reviewer, and then we will close. Next slide, please. So now let's hear from our president-elect to learn more about the history of the award, values of the society, importance of recognizing this work, and the importance of recognizing this work in the larger context.
Okay, y'all, I don't know how to get it to play. It worked earlier.
Hello, it's a pleasure to share. Hello, it's a pleasure to share the history of the Best DEI Paper Award. After a year of dialogue on diversity, under ASEE President Sarah Rayala, the Diversity Committee, that's the old name, was formed in 2011. The first year I served on the committee, PRISM published the homophobic Helmner letter, which prompted Stephanie Farrell and I to draft the committee's response, and that was published in the next issue of PRISM. I was also serving as PIC chair at that time and was able to get 12 safe zone sessions added that year, and it's continued every year since. Terry Reed and I served as co-chairs of the committee for 2014 to 2015, which became ASEE's Year of Action on Diversity. We were a much smaller group at that time, and we knew we needed to build in lasting infrastructure to position diversity, equity, and inclusion central to engineering. During our monthly teleconferences, our passionate team brainstormed ideas, and the idea of an award rose to the top. Building on the premise that we measure and we acknowledge what we value most, our team negotiated hard for the DEI award to be open society-wide and to be included in the PIC Best Paper session, along with the same monetary and visible accolades. To gain approval from the ASEE Board of Directors, we modeled the process and the rubric after the published PIC Best Paper Selection rubric and award process. The first award was given in 2015. After 3 years, in order to increase the understanding and readership of those papers nominated for the Best Diversity Paper, which is now the DEI Best Paper. Janet Callahan, Stephanie Farrell, and I wrote a review paper highlighting the breadth of topics considered and their implications. In 3 years, we had 35 different groups that included 30 divisions, 1 committee, and 4 regions that participated in the competition for a total of 59 papers, and met the vision of including broad interpretations and dimensions of visible and non-visible forms of diversity. Around that same time, Walter Lee from Virginia Tech also led a team to conduct a deep content analysis on papers that were nominated from the Minorities in Engineering Division and the Women in Engineering Division, and illustrated the impact of ASCE member research and practice for minorities and women. The breadth of engagement has only increased since these first few years. Every year since, if I lack the time to read any additional papers beyond those for which I review, I find myself downloading and carefully reading the DEI award finalists. In our review in 2017, we concluded that the Best Diversity Paper provides ASCE with a wide-angle perspective on how divisions, committees, and zones focus their efforts on broadening and practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the engineering education profession. I suspect it is time for another review paper intentionally examining these concepts and if they're becoming better infused into engineering pedagogy. All those years ago, in our proposal to the Board of Directors for the Year of Action on Diversity, we stated, engineering is empowering society in unprecedented ways. It is at the core of innovation and can address grand challenges facing the US and the world. In order for the engineering discipline to reach its full potential, the engineering education community and the engineering and engineering technology profession must better include all segments of our society. This remains critically important. The establishment of the Division of Equity, Culture, and Social Justice in Education this year is yet another institutionalized conduit for scholarship in this important area within engineering. In closing, the current award, rubric, and process has been refined and improved under the leadership of many outstanding chairs of the now Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm extremely thrilled that our efforts to institutionalize DEI into the heart of ASCE have been successful, and I can't wait to read each of your papers in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Adrienne. It has been an honor to work on the Commission for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion under your guidance and mentorship. I'm so happy that I got to overlap with you for at least a year. So here are the links for the 2 papers that she referenced. These are also available at our website or will be soon. But they can also be found just through the ASEE peer paper upload, the conference proceeding historical archive. One of the things that we've noticed is that many divisions are not consistent about submitting nominations. Even in those first 3 years, there were some divisions that submitted once, nominated 1 paper, some divisions that nominated 2, but only a couple of divisions that had nominated a paper every single year. And so while that tells us that perhaps the appearance of papers related to diversity, equity, and inclusion is variable in those divisions, it may also be that perhaps the information and the knowledge to do a nomination isn't being passed down very well from program chair to program chair. So one of the things we decided last year was that we wanted to focus on making sure we could get that information out to people who are potential reviewers and also to program chairs. And for those of you that joined here as authors, these tips will be beneficial for you, but you also most likely serve as a reviewer and might be able to communicate with your program chair to make sure that your division is considering nominating a paper for this award. Because we've had such diversity in who has submitted nominations, we've also had quite a bit of diversity in the different constituent groups of ASCE that have been represented as finalists. And I suppose I should have introduced myself. I'm Susan Walden, and I am the past chair of the Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And before I joined the chair team, I was the program chair for the committee for a year. So let's, what do we mean by diversity? This is going to be an important thing to think about. Adrienne mentioned that it covers a wide range of aspects, and we really do mean pretty much any way that, or any population of students or colleagues, faculty, professionals that are not part of who has been traditionally dominant in engineering. And maybe that is looking in a comparative basis, so between whatever that dominant identity may be and whatever the minoritized or marginalized identity may be. And as you can see from this list, it does include many named that are visible or non-visible differences, but perhaps within the context of your institution, you might have other groups that, that you want to focus your efforts on helping make sure that they are included or that you are being equitable in your treatment of them. So this can be defined individually as long as it is defined. I'm sorry, individually, like within your paper, within the concept of your work. And of course, we value papers that take an intersectional lens. This is not to imply that any one of these lenses should be, or necessarily even could be, examined in isolation of any of the others. So 2-3 years ago, when I was heading the Best DEI Paper Committee, the people on the committee felt that it was important that we provide something with a little more guidelines or guidance than the rubric that we use. But we also thought that it was important to not talk about a paper as being a bad paper versus a good paper. We thought of it more as the good papers are what one could think of in terms of a threshold level paper. So if you're talking about your pedagogy and you're thinking about student outcomes in sense of threshold or fluency or mastery, we decided that we wanted to structure this comparison, an easy one-pager that had what we would consider to be threshold papers. They're making a good attempt. They're getting started thinking about DEI, but they're not really ready to be considered for best DEI paper across all of the ASCE. And so those papers would include, maybe they just have a dimension of diversity included, but it wasn't really central to what the work they were trying to do. So for example, the paper might be about a classroom intervention and the classroom had women and men, and that population is reported as being, say, 20 men and 10 women, but then there's no other analysis beyond that, and there's no gender framing at all in the design of the intervention or in the outcomes or analysis of the outcomes, then that would be what we call a threshold paper. The authors have recognized that gender can be an important factor to consider in how the classroom culture develops and how the students interact with each other in the classroom, and how learning is socially constructed. But they didn't use any of the frameworks that might be available to design their intervention or whatever their classroom engagement tool was, or to analyze or interpret their data. So these are the papers that are getting started, but they're not fully grounded in or intentionally addressing equity or inclusion issues. And so then the other set of criterion that we published is those for what we call the Great DEI Paper. So these are papers that should be nominated. Only each division can only nominate one paper. So you have to perhaps need some kind of process internally to decide what that is. And Becky's going to talk about that in a minute. But you, as you're looking at them, these are going to be the papers that rise more to the fluency or the mastery level. So they are papers that, where that dimension of diversity was foundational to the design of the project, whether that be a research project or a classroom practice project. The paper either focuses on making engineering more inclusive, or perhaps documenting and increasing the equity in how we practice engineering. And these papers are going to be thoroughly grounded with and connected to the literature. So they're going to have a good summary or synthesis of what's known in this area to date, what's been done, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And they provide a rationale for why the authors are doing what they're doing in their paper, in their context. So it goes beyond just describing the program or the experience. It collects robust data, qualitative or quantitative, and has an intentional literature grounded analysis and interpretation of that data. And I think Becky is going to talk about the review process. When do we stop for questions though?
After this. So for the review process, we have the next slide actually has a link to the rubric, but the process is that reviewers actually have a button in the reviewing space where they can say this should be a best diversity paper nominee. So paper chair or program chairs should be letting their reviewers know that this is an option for them. We would really suggest that you highlight the diversity rubric that we're using to evaluate the papers afterwards. So this is something where if somebody's not sure if something could do well in a best paper competition, they should look at the rubric as they are evaluating the paper. So we'll have a link for that. So reviewers suggest nominees to program chairs, and then program chairs should have some sort of internal process to nominate papers to our committee. The dates for this are parallel to the PIC Best Paper Award. We did this intentionally so that all of the deadlines are the same. That means we have a really tight review process on our end. So we also, if you are a member, delegate, or friend of the committee, we also seek out reviewers for this Best Paper Award. Every paper that's nominated by a division has 3 to 5 independent reviewers using just the diversity, equity, and inclusion best paper rubric to evaluate it. We take those scores then and look at the, thank you, Susan. We look at the scores for that rubric.
I'm sorry, were you ready for rubric or not?
Yeah, we can go there. So we process those scores and then come up with finalists. And the finalists are typically the top scorers. And we look at how much room we have. So this year, there were a number of really good papers, and they kind of clustered in terms of the numbers. So we had ones that we called honorable mentions, that they were close to the finalists. For this Best DEI Paper award, we don't just use the evaluation of the paper rubric, but this is part of the evaluation process. For the award, we ask the finalists to do presentations at the conference, and it is a combination of their paper scores and their presentation scores that lead us to make the final selection for the award. So in the rubric, there are multiple different facets that we look at. Each of these aspects are rated from 0 to 3, and we, in our training for the reviewers, we make clear that we want both research papers and practitioner papers to be valued equally. And so when there's an option of evaluating something, we say, okay, it could, from the research perspective, it might look like this. From the practitioner perspective, it might look like this. And so originality and impact is one aspect, but the approach, a researcher might take a different approach than a practitioner. So there's still ways to rate those from 0 to 3. So in the content, which is 50% of the numeric award, we look at originality and impact, the approach, what kinds of results or outcomes you see, the scholarship or description of the context and the framing, and then the relevance. So do we see this as a highly relevant aspect? So that's content. And then how well is the paper focused? This is 35%. Do they talk about their goals, both in the research or in the practitioner space? Does the flow work? Does it make sense? And are the conclusions likely to have an impact? And are they well stated? And then, because it's a best paper award, how is it presented overall in terms of communication? Are the mechanics of the language, is the style something that we would want to highlight? And is it something that draws in listeners? So this is the rubric. Once we do this, we name our finalists, invite them to present, and then make a decision. So at this point, I think so we're about to get ready for the breakout session, and we're going to have you in 3 different types of groups with different kinds of questions to think about. But before we go into that, do we have questions for about any of this stuff for me or Susan? I know Adrian's trying to get here. I don't know if she's been able to get here yet.
Oh, hi, I have a question.
I'm here.
Okay, my name is Bala Maheswaran. I am actually representing Entrepreneurial and Engineering Innovation Division as their delegate.
Yep.
My question is, there's a pick best paper. There's a zone best paper.
Yep.
Now, this particular activity is highly based on divisions. But
Yes.
are you guys moving to the sections and zones? Because are you getting best papers, best diversity papers from sections and zones and nominating that as a best diversity paper for the ASW? Because ASW has 2 papers. One is from the PIC side,
Yes. Yeah.
side.
And I apologize for forgetting to mention that, but the Best DEI Paper Award is open to nominees from zones and from divisions. And so we have had at least one finalist come out of a zone. So whether it's a zone or a section conference, then so it needs to be published in the preceding year for the zones and divisions. And if they make it into the finals, then we ask them to present that paper as part of the finalist presentations at the ASEE conference.
Thank you.
So, yes, we do include all ASEE publications in this space. Are there other questions? Adrian is here now.
Hi, my name is Katie. I'm from the PCEE division, and I have a question about what you just said about papers from last year. And I guess I'm not clear on how that process rolls forward.
Okay.
Can you clarify?
Yeah, so that is for, so the award is either for papers that are coming into the current conference, ASCE conference, or The ASCE zones and regions, so the geographic areas, also have their own conferences, and those conferences are typically held in either October or April. So papers that were presented in the prior October or April zone or section conferences, those ones are eligible for this award.
I think another way to look at it is ASCE's fiscal year is October through September. But most of our functions, like these awards, essentially go from one ASCE conference to the next. So any paper that is presented at a section or zone meeting between now and the 2021 annual conference, national conference, will be could be submitted or nominated for best DEI paper, but the authors would need to attend the national conference to present their paper, in addition to having presented it at whatever section or zone meeting they were at during this coming year.
One other question, if it's okay. So do you have delegates from the divisions?
Yep.
Are you taking delegates from the sections? Because there are 3 times 4, 12 sections there.
We could. Many times, though, they're represented in other ways. We haven't talked about that yet, and I should leave this answer to Susan, but it's possible for everybody to be a friend of the commission.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, so I'm going to suggest we go into our breakout rooms. I am putting into the chat window the link to the slides. What we are going to ask you to do is answer these questions, and then for each number of your group, there is a slide for you. And so you should go in and say, and you can go in and edit that slide. On the left-hand side, take some notes about your discussion. On the right-hand side, please write down any of the clear takeaways that you would like to report back. And we hope we can get through them all, but if we can't, they're still recorded in the slides. So if you're writing a paper, how could you incorporate suggestions for a great paper into your questions, your perspectives, what you observe, whether it's in your research or practice, and how it might be communicated? For reviewing papers, how could you hone your feedback skills? So here's an example of the editing question. What kind of feedback could support more attention to these issues? You might be reading a paper where you think they could have added value to it by addressing some of these issues. How could you give feedback to that so that when they come back with their next iterations of the research or practice, they're including this? And then program chairs, how could you support or train your reviewers? And what could get better submissions out of your space? Okay, so I think we can go into breakout sessions. You can ask for help if you're in a breakout session. We'd like you to think about these questions and then come back and give us feedback, and we'll give you about 10 minutes in the breakout sessions. So what we'd like to do now is just kind of a quick report out. This is when Bree at the beginning talked about not having closure. There is not enough time to talk about all of the things we could do here. So this is also something that program chairs might need to move forward with. Authors should keep finding community to discuss things with. Evaluators can, in all of their spaces, think about these things. So I'm wondering if we can get a report out, perhaps starting with the authors group. Is somebody willing to talk about briefly talk about their takeaways?
Hang on just a second. If we want to capture the screen, the closed captioning, I need to be able to share screen, and I can't.
And is there somebody from the author's perspective that would like to?
Lisa or Hoda?
You would need to unmute.
Yes, there. Okay, so as you said, there's just not enough time. So we got through maybe 3 scenarios or work that individuals are currently undertaking. One, looking at autism and neurodiversity among students and faculty within a college, within a department. The other one dealt with hiring female faculty and the impact of freezes and who gets excluded and what searches were more exclusionary than others, and taking a look at a deeper dive into racial and ethnic diversity, along with international diversity as well. And then the third topic that we got to looked at the connections, kind of the life cycle for recruitment, more of an outreach recruitment and then retention of students, so that you can't just look at them as grade 12 getting ready to graduate, but what does the environment look like, who are in the classes and who are not in the classes, and then the support that is given within and the preparation that's given within the university setting as we prepare them to move into their careers. I gave the example of nuclear engineering just because you know, we sometimes pluck our visible and in this particular invisible students, and they're not going back to their community. And then we're taking them, and the nuclear power plant is not necessarily in close to a downtown area. So the diversity for the area that they are going to then be working in becomes problematic. So in total, we're talking about visible and invisible diversity matters, taking a life cycle approach to diversity and equity.
Great, thank you. I think we're going to have to move on to the next group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think Lisa actually covered everything that we talked about. Thank you, Lisa.
Great. Okay, so then I think the next slide is the evaluator perspective. So do we have somebody from the reviewer group?
I think I was the most outspoken one in the reviewer group. Do you guys want me to?
Sure.
So what we ended up talking about was some parallel recognition of people who are doing wonderful contributions fundamental to engineering education versus, or in parallel to, recognition of people who are doing fundamental contributions in interventions. I think that, in my opinion, some people who are doing clever interventions or novel interventions are intimidated by the level of rigor that people who really focus all their energy on engineering education do. And so we don't necessarily get the contributions that we could be getting from people who are you know, whose fundamental research is something other than engineering education, but are still dedicated classroom teachers and trying to do clever things. So maybe 2 tracks of recognition could help broaden the appeal.
But also highlighting where this comes into play, because this is something that our rubric asks for both practitioner perspective and the researcher perspective. And so then thinking about how can reviewers support the feedback so that that's strengthened in both places, I think is one way we can do that. And then you're right, considering additional awards is always a possibility. Thank you. Okay, and then program chairs. And I think go to the next, yeah.
I'm happy to jump in. So we similarly felt like there was not a lot of there was an opportunity for a lot more education for authors and reviewers and program chairs. So we would love to see some unifying strategies that would help us understand this coming from the commission. And division chairs sounded like the program chairs sounded like they'd be interested in bringing that back to their divisions as a unifying strategy across the entire conference. So it would be great to get some language that we could use that's consistent and targeted at all authors. And then actually maybe we even said, if it's coming from, you know, you want to submit a paper to this conference, maybe we could start the education there, asking people to click through some information about DEI research. And as they move forward as authors, they would know that going forward into their future research. We also discussed how we can use tagging for authors to identify themselves as DEI papers. And also Thang came up with a great idea in division level meetings with her teachers, or not her teachers, her authors, to include DEI as fundamental information. So yeah, some of the big problems that the program chairs face is that even if people do submit papers, we're not sure if it's great diversity or not. And sometimes it can feel like we don't have the bandwidth to figure out what is great diversity. So this training's been useful. I think we need to continue becoming more masterful ourselves in understanding what it is.
Thank you, Katie. So I think these are really good ways of moving this forward and thinking about it at all levels. One of our clear goals has been to increase how our society really thinks about diversity, equity, and inclusion broadly, so that it's not just a couple of people or a couple of divisions, but expanding that. So these are great extensions. And I'm going to ask everybody that's here today to think about how you can participate in this, no matter what your role is. So program chairs giving feedback and helping craft some of this language would be great. Authors doing the scholarship and working across the fields so that all of these areas can be strengthened. And then evaluators really thinking about what are you looking for and how can you give constructive feedback. So thank you all for kind of wrestling with these questions. We're going to have to close this. As I said in one group, if you want to continue the discussion, we're willing to keep, or happy to keep the room open for people to keep talking, but we need to let people go as well. So I think on the next slide, we just have a couple of things. We hope you join us in this process, whether that's as an evaluator or somebody that's writing papers and hoping they get nominated. And as we look forward for this fall, on the next slide is a link to how you can participate in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Fall webinar series, or propose resources that we can share on our website or blog posts. So there's, as we talked about, there's a wide range of dimensions of diversity. So this is a space where you can propose how you might contribute to the resources that are available for everybody. So on behalf of the other presenters, I would like to say a very sincere thank you for your participation today. Encourage you to keep participating. And if you want to stay a little longer and ask questions, I'm happy to do it, but I think we'll close the formal webinar workshop right now and wish you a really happy rest of the summer.
I'm really curious what was meant by the unifying process across the society.
From the program.
Katie, are you still on?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were thinking about how this feels like a division level thing. And because division program chairs change frequently, I think, at least they do in my division, and because it feels like it's sort of a retraining of what's required in addition, I mean, what we hope is that this normalizes, right? We hope that across the whole structure, everyone understands better what it means to make a great, fluent, masterful use of DEI research in their writing and in their publication, right? We really want that to happen. We don't want people just to be identifying, oh, they had women in this study, so I think it's DEI. That's the problem. But asking the program chairs to sort of regulate that through the call for papers feels like it won't be as hard hitting or maybe as quick as saying like, you know what, our whole society is going to move together with this. So if it became like, you know, there's a DEI commission now, it carries a lot of authority. If it became the kind of centerpiece for how to describe, you know, the commission tells us how to describe it through the rubric and through the call for papers and the award website, which is great. I just think it's also the kind of thing where program chairs feel like we're not going to be able to do the right educating until we get a more level message, so that it's not from committee or from division to division. How do you self-nominate a diversity paper? How do you otherwise nominate a diversity paper?
Yeah. Okay, all right. I think I'm
there's one other thing I wanted.
I think I understand what you're saying. Okay.
Bala was in our conversation too, Bala.
Okay, the thing is, when authors, they upload their paper, they can write a tiny comment, a paragraph to the program chair. You can ask them to write a kind of a short paragraph to say that why this paper should be considered for diversity paper, just 4 or 5 lines. So they can give some key points.
Okay.
So this will make things much easier for the program chair to, identify some certain reviewers, special type of, people, they kind of more experience in reviewing papers like this. So he can send the papers to, kind of a random, at the same time, they have some experience in reviewing the diversity papers. So this way will make things much easier. Otherwise, what they're going to do, they're going to assign this paper, somebody is doing some other thing somewhere. So he probably won't, really identify the issues there.
Yeah, and I mean, in this, how do we get the messaging pushed out through the picks and into the general high level call has been a...
No, the authors, the program chairs can add a paragraph, when they call for papers, they have this call for paper, whatever the PDF, they can say, they can mention there, if you want us to nominate your paper for this particular category, just write few lines for the program chair, whatever.
Susan,
yeah, I think there's been a reluctance to tell people how to do this. So maybe if we can come up with a few ideas, we could give them as options.
Yeah, Susan, when I was writing...
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jenna.
I was just thinking that someone mentioned the tag. I think it's a good idea for if there is a unique, uniform message that, statement that can go from the commission to all the divisions, so that they will, as Bala said, they could include it in their call for papers that says the same thing, which is what the commission wants, right?
Yeah.
Receive papers. So do that. So it should be uniform and everybody does it so that it goes out in all the call for papers. And then the tagging system, I think, it's a very good idea to have, if we can add that tag so that the individual actually have it there as an option, so that any presenter or any author can tag that if they believe that their paper somewhat or another meets the criteria. Maybe have a link in that call for papers to the website and to the rubric, so that the authors have at their disposal everything that they could do for them to decide whether or not my paper qualifies.
I was going to say exactly what Jenna was going to say, or she just said.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I was just going to repeat what Jenna just said. She's down here for me.
So one of the challenges, just to let people know, and one of the reasons why we are going directly to the people in this forum and trying to talk to program chairs, is that there are limitations to what we can do on the website and with the submission of papers. So I don't know if there's any group that is more hopeful about the rebuild of whatever the next generation of monolith is than I. But this is something where it has been very difficult and challenging to actually have large-scale infrastructure changes to support this. So as with many DEI issues, some of it has to be grassroots efforts that build up to it. So there have been efforts to make this more visible on the monolith side, but we also really hope that program chairs and authors and reviewers can think about how can we all participate in this process. We'll keep moving.
Or drive this process.
Right.
Drive these improvements.
But the thing is that, again, as I think Katie said, that the program chairs, essentially pretty much in any division I'm a member of, they're on a rolling basis. So they come and go. So what we need to do is to do something grounds up, which is systemically taking care of the problem. Because this year you might grab the attention of a program chair, but next year you may not have it. So it has to be systemically done right. And I agree with you that Monolith has a lot of issues, but hopefully with the change that we can address that preemptively so that, you know, in the new system, we can think about that from grounds up so that it'll be included in the new system.
Jenna,
Will do. I will take that back to the commission leadership.
I think having a paragraph or two that we can all put in our calls for papers, because that's what's handed down from program chair to program chair, and that's where you can get some consistency throughout the years. And that's really just, you know, we just cut and paste our call for papers from year to year with just a few minor changes. If that's in there every year, then that'll get passed down. I think that's probably a good place to start.
And maybe beg them to elevate it to the top of the, you know, somewhere visible, you know, at the top of the call for papers with links to the website, to the CDI website, to the rubric, and then including that tag would be enormously helpful, I would think, as a user. I'm looking at it from a user's perspective.
So Julian,
yes,
we've been messaging this workshop since the annual conference through chairs, through delegates, I used the hub that went out to division chairs. Liz sent the memo out to pick chairs to send to officers. And we had 11 of the 60 program chairs here today.
What?
What do you suggest is a way to even get those paragraphs to program chairs for calls for papers?
I would suggest drafting up something that you think would be sort of short and sweet, and just ask the program chairs, please include this in your call for papers. I mean, I'd imagine it's hard to do with, you know, 4 or 5 sentences, but anything that's, you know, that you could include, that you could ask the program chairs to include, I think that would be hugely beneficial, because that's where the consistency comes in from year to year.
And there's,
do you have access to a mailing list to all program chairs this year?
Me, no. This is my first year as program chair, so.
Okay.
I think you can get it from Manicom. If you guys ask, they will give it to you, I think.
Right.
Sometimes.
I would recommend you just email us directly, because just to give you an idea, I'm on 2 different pick chairs mailing lists because of the divisions I'm in, and I only heard from one of them. So I'm not going to call anyone out, but just letting you know.
Yeah, ditto, Lynn. The thing is getting the email addresses for all the program chairs. There used to be a pretty easy way to do that, and they've taken it away.
Okay, I can't help you there.
And I will say, a couple years ago, when we as a commission, as a committee, stopped having our own calls for papers because they stopped letting us, we actually sent out information to program chairs and said, please include this information. It's 1 sentence.
And it didn't happen? You just don't know if it did.
We do know. There were about, it was under 20 that included the call. Like, just here's 1 sentence that lets you add it in your general call that especially encourage people to look at issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was a minority.
Maybe, Becky, maybe you need a little more detail as opposed to just encouraging people to say, you know, something along the lines of, encourage people to investigate this. But, oh gosh, I don't know how to say it. Advertise that there's an award, advertise what you need to be in the paper for the award. Yeah, I don't know.
And I do think that where in divisions where they have had successful processes and successful nominees, they have had an internal process that is made visible to their members that says, we do it like this. We pick this. And so they actually then recognize whoever their nominee is as part of their, like, hey, this is our best paper, if they have a best paper award. But then they formally in their processes recognize this is our nominee for the best diversity, equity, and inclusion paper. Therefore, this is the winner of that for our division.
So we do that in mechanics. So if you could send a paragraph or so and the rubric that we saw, I think that would be hugely beneficial in terms of the divisions doing the evaluations of best paper, best presentation, and then we could have a best DEI rubric to go through as well.
Yeah, that usually goes out to either the program chairs when we have a list, or to the PIC chairs and ask them to forward. So,
okay.
Becky, I realize I did not realize that ASCE is not cooperating with the commission in terms of communication to the chairs, and I would think that with the push over the last couple of years at ASCE to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would think that if you were to go to them now and say, we need cooperation for dissemination of information, that you might get a different answer. Whereas previously they took away your, the facilitating that. Maybe now they would be saying, yeah, tell us how we can help you to do this.
I think there's definitely ways. I think that there might be some things on the new hub that will let us make things a little more visible, but there's also already some limitations to that that are challenging for us as a commission that's basically has open membership. So it doesn't work within the hub structure. So there's some potential new avenues, but there's also some constraints even within that. I think one of the things I hope you all noticed that the president-elect of the society was one of the presenters today. So I know that voice is going to be present in the board space. So I think that this is, yeah, we should all keep working on this. We know we need to do systemic approaches, but we also want to make sure that, and one of these things is going to be putting out these recordings so that program chairs can come back and find this information.
Yeah.
Have you thought about inviting back the honorable mentions for a session of presenting their work?
Yes.
Awesome.
Actually, well, what we've done is encouraged people, all of the finalists, and honorable mentions to do either webinars or to do blog posts that highlight their scholarship. So that's just as another way of disseminating that. So that link that was on the very last slide that we showed, that yes, we'll publicize that.
But not necessarily coming back to the conference to present their work. I wouldn't say again, but I would say an enhanced version of their work.
Well, I guess then you're kind of looking at, well, what are the processes for new publications? And so I hope we try to be encouraging that people continue their scholarship.
Yeah.
And move forward. And that's one of the reasons why we want to recognize it with both the paper award, being a finalist, getting an honorable mention, that these are all ways to show people that we appreciate the work that they're doing and hope that they continue. And even then, it's not all of it. There's lots of people doing good work where we can't recognize everybody, but we do want to encourage it.
The one thing I would ask you, Becky, if you guys do get a paragraph or so together that we can put in our call for papers, is to definitely express the practitioner side of things. I think someone called that out earlier, and that would need to be expressed as something that you're looking for also.
Yeah.
I had a note down here about that.
Yeah, there was a Katie in our breakout room who has a good point. She's like, you know, a lot of people who do engineering education have the resources available to them to do this kind of work. Whereas the rest of us that are doing the technical side of things, you know, we might have a lot of good ideas that we incorporate in our courses and classes and pedagogy, but it's not good enough to rise to the level of the rubric and what these papers require. And so that might be somewhat of a discouragement for individuals who will never be at the level that they can do only this. But so yeah, having that practitioner expound on it and emphasizing it, that you know, both are welcome, would be a good thing.
It's welcome, and we want them to do a great job. Like, so some of it can be just, you know, our example of saying, oh yeah, there were some women in the class when we tried this intervention. That's actually not enough in a practitioner analysis. So to say that we did something to ask them, we tried something that would specifically address this, and then we looked into it more deeply. So do you give all of the students the exact same survey and just said, well, 30% were women? Or do you actually go and then follow up?
Yeah.
Hey, what was your experience? So that you actually know more as a practitioner about what the experience of that person was.
Or you didn't try something because you thought it would be a good idea. You tried something because you've read this research on, you've read these research summaries, or you met people at the conference that do research on helping women in electrical engineering classes. And so you think this would be a good idea because of this literature. And it's not just that it came to you as you were walking your dog one day. So
so then it's grounding in the theory.
Right.
I mean, really quick.
Yep.
So I think it's really great, you know, we can provide the program chairs with a lot of information, but if I could be honest with you all, I was a finalist in 2018, and it was my first ASWE conference, and I didn't know anything about the competition. And so when we submitted the paper, we just submitted our work. And so I did not look at a rubric to make sure that what I was writing aligned with the rubric. You know, we just did good work. And so I think it's about, you know, being sincere and genuine in the work that you do, and not just looking at a rubric and making sure you can check off the boxes. And I think that's the great part about being a scholar, is being able to think outside of the box and not just checking off boxes. So although I think all of these things are great, I don't want us to like box people in, because there may be somebody else who can think of something else that we're not even considering on our criteria. And so I just want to put that in the room, because honestly, I had no idea. And so when I did get the email, I was just like, oh, okay, and just was going along with the process. And however my program chair or the reviewer said, you know, you can make your paper better by this, you know, doing this, that's what I did. And so I guess that's just my 2 cents about, you know, just trying to do work and research or whatever. I guess I don't do things for competitions. I just try and do work. And if I'm recognized, I'm recognized, but that's just how I work. Everybody's different, and I understand people have to get tenure, so.
Well, I want to add that, Bree, you also are at Purdue, where you have professors who prioritize this. And that one of the things that I think is important that we should bring up in this space is, you know, Alice Pauley wrote that editorial that said, if you aren't writing a paper that disaggregates your data to understand the experiences of other people, then you need to explain why you didn't do that. Because it puts the onus on people saying, why is this not a diversity paper? Because the value system that our organization has placed forth is that everything should be a diversity paper. Because if you aren't looking at your data, even if you're in a practitioner technical space, if you aren't disaggregating data, you aren't serving your students, because you don't know how you're serving them. And so that to me is one of the key messages. You know, maybe we need to have Alice do a talk specifically on her editorial and then use that as a pivot point, because to me that makes the case of why we need to do this, rather than saying, oh yeah, we also have a rubric. And so I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good idea, and I do not mind reaching out to her.
Yep. Yeah, I'll +1 that one also.
I really
all right,
like
y'all.
this slide.
This has been a great conversation, and thank you for sticking around. We want to, I guess, increase the depth, and I loved Bree using the word, the authenticity and the genuineness of what people are doing. It shouldn't be just because we say it in the rubric. I think the real message is that those things that we're asking about in the rubric just make for a good educational piece, whatever that piece is. If that is understanding teaching and learning, if it's looking at a particular classroom intervention, or if it's or curriculum piece, or if it is education, I guess engineering studies maybe. So study of engineering and engineering cultures. So thank you all. I'm really enjoying this, but it is getting close to 1:30, and I think most of us probably have semesters starting very quickly. Katie asked a question in the chat. So the text that went into those slides is a 1-page document that is on the diversity, equity, inclusion paper website. It says
it's also
click here for a 1-page update.
It's also
you
in the
can
materials
find it
for
there.
Yes.
So yeah, so one of those, the link to the paper, to the award website that was in one of the earlier slides will get you there. Oh, and it's in the materials for the webinar. Cool. Thank you so much to Bree and Megan for helping this run smoothly, even with all of the technical difficulties that the other 4 of us seem to be having today, technical and calendar difficulties. Thank you to those who stuck around and participated in this follow-on conversation. Be sure and hang on to the link for the slides, and watch for announcements of our future workshops.